Today I'll show you what a histogram is, and I want to see whether it's still relevant to get a good photograph in 2019. The histogram is basically a graph showing the distribution of the luminance of the pixels in your composition, from pure black to pure white. Digital cameras have had them for a long time, and when you open up your image in any kind of decent editing software, you will get a histogram of your image if you have that setting turned on. So they must be important, but how do they work? How do you read them, and how can you use them in your day-to-day photography to make your life easier? First of all, a histogram is a graph. On your vertical axis is the number of pixels, and along the horizontal axis is the luminance range from pure black to pure white. This normally has about 255 different shades. Some have more, some have less, depending on the quality of the histogram. The Sony cameras don't have great histogram displays, but they're still useful and you can still use them. The best way to understand a histogram is to look at a basic black and white image. If you look at this image, there are 5 shades going from black to white. On the histogram, there are 5 lines showing how many pixels are in the image. As there are only 5 shades, there are only 5 zones filled in the histogram. If you look at this image, I have put 10 shades from black to white. On the corresponding histogram, there are 10 zones filled. In this third image, there is a gradient from black to white, so it contains all of the range from black to white. You can now see on the histogram this range of tonalities and the number of pixels in each zone. And this is basically how a histogram works. It shows you the number of pixels in each of those zones, from pure black to pure white. So I've just set my camera up on the tripod, looking out of my window, so I can show you what I mean by the histogram. If we look at this shot, you can see I've got this really dark patch here, and this is the window frame. And that relates to this big spike on the left-hand side. The brighter bits in the distance, where you can see the sky and these 3 sections there, that's this little bump towards the right of the histogram. This medium-sized bump in the middle relates to the buildings. Now, if I zoom in, getting rid of this window frame, watch how the histogram changes. So you can see that big spike on the left-hand side has now disappeared. We've got more of a spike here. So this spike on the left-hand side now relates to the buildings, and the spike on the right-hand side relates to the bright parts in the sky. As you can see, as I change my composition, the histogram changes. As I bring in that window frame, you can see that spike peak on the left-hand side. And as I come away from that, that spike disappears. Now, if I change my exposure compensation, so I'm going to bring it to 1 stop, or maybe 1.5 stops over, you can see the sky is completely overexposed. If you look at the histogram, it's bunched up to the left-hand side. We still have a little bit of a lump in the middle, and that relates to the front of these buildings. So if your histogram looks like this and you don't have the zebras on warning you of this, then you'll have to bring your exposure down. If you're in aperture priority, you can use your exposure compensation dial to do this. If you're in manual mode, you'll have to adjust either ISO, aperture, or your shutter, bringing down the exposure so you don't clip the highlights. So I've dropped my exposure compensation dial to 2 stops under what the camera thinks the exposure should be. You can see now that the buildings are really dark. They relate to this spike on the left-hand side. So we've still got these brighter parts in the sky, but they're a lot less brighter than they were with a correct exposure. So you can see these parts of the sky relate to this little spike in the middle. So once again, I'll take it to 1 stop under, and you can see as I bring the exposure up, the histogram is slowly moving to the right. If I bring it up to 0 on the meter, you can see it's kind of evening off, but because there's some dark parts where these buildings are and the bright parts where the sky is, it's almost like a double spiked histogram. With a color image, some more advanced programs might break up the different colors. So it'll look at red, green, and blue separately. It also does it on this preview screen on the back of the Sony cameras. This is just showing the distribution of pixels per color channel in your image. Now, hopefully that all makes sense. Basically, when you look at your histogram, if your shot is overexposed, it'll tend to be skewed to the right. If it's underexposed, it'll be skewed to the left. All you need to do is make sure it's not clipped, so it's not really bunched up to one side or the other. Otherwise, you'll start to lose detail in your highlights when it's bunched to the right, and your shadows when it's bunched to the left. Now you know how it works. There are quite a few bits of information you can gather from your histogram when you have it up on your display. When you have a well-balanced image, the histogram will look like this. This means the luminance levels are well within the capabilities of your camera, and you will have detail throughout your image. When the histogram is bunched to the right, chances are you'll be clipping your highlights. This means you'll be losing details in the brightest parts of your image. If this is the case, you will need to bring down your exposure to make sure you keep all of that detail in the highlights. If your histogram is bunched to the left-hand side, chances are you'll be starting to lose detail in your shadows. If you increase your exposure to bring it away from the left-hand side, you'll tend to avoid this problem. If your histogram is touching both sides like this, chances are you'll be losing detail in the highlights and the shadows. This normally means the dynamic range is too big for your camera. So unless you're going for a silhouette shot or a contrasty image, you'll need to do something to get a better photograph. Either by framing up a different shot where the dynamic range is smaller, or by bracketing your shots. If you don't know what bracketing is but want to learn more, click on the eye in the corner. This will take you to another of my videos. Now, if you go on that information alone and always use your histogram, you'll try and get a nice smooth curve in the middle of the histogram. But this doesn't always work, and this doesn't always produce a really good image. So there are exceptions to this rule. And this is where it comes down to personal taste. One image might look good to one person, but another person might not like it at all. So I've loaded into Lightroom some example images. These first images are of a snowscape on the South Island in New Zealand. The images are very bright, but I've tried not to push the histogram all the way to the right-hand side. So with this one, with the sun, you can see that's this little tag in the corner, but everything else is exposed okay. And that means there's a bit of a gap, and then we have all of our colors here. The histogram is skewed to the right, but it's still a good exposure. With this next one, it was a little bit more stormy and the sun wasn't out. But you can see I've pushed the image all the way to the right, but just before it's overexposed. Then this one of Mount Cook, it's a slightly darker image, but you can see again the histogram is pushed over to the right. This next one is a hot air balloon over a mountain. Again, there's lots of whites in the image, and you can see this on the histogram. It's all shoved over to the right. With this next image, it's almost on the opposite end of the scale. The histogram really is bunched over to the left, but I still really like the image. The sunlight was catching this staircase up the side of the volcano, and it really makes it stand out. All the shadows are disappearing off into the distance, but it's quite a striking image. I took this next shot from a plane window. Again, it's quite striking, and the wing is really bright, as are the clouds, but then the sky is really dark, as is the sea, and you can see this on the histogram. I think this spike here is probably the wing, and then this big lump here is the sky and the sea. Now this silhouette at sunrise has lots of darks in the image, and you can see that here on the histogram, and where the sun is just creeping into the image, that's this little tag here. Next, I have this image of the corner of a Buddhist temple in Singapore. I've purposely darkened down the sky and I've upped the contrast on it. The only things that really stand out are these parts of the roofs. The rest is really dark, and we can see that on the histogram. I think it's still quite a striking image. It really does stand out. But if you just looked at the histogram alone, you'd want to raise the exposure. Next, I'm going to have a look at a few contrasting images. As you can see with this one, the sun was just behind this mountain. It was bouncing off the clouds up above, and you can see all of the lights were still on in the city. This bright area in the middle of the shot is this peak here on the histogram. And then the darker areas down here and up here in the clouds, well, that's this part of the histogram. Again, the histogram isn't that kind of bell-curved pattern, but I think the image really stands out. With this image, we've got more of a distribution of luminance from black to white. You can see on the histogram, there's a few spikes, but it's much more evenly distributed. And then this last image, there's a really dark part down here, which equates to the left-hand side, but then it goes right through the range up to this bright part of the cloud, which is probably this spike here. That might even be this part here. But there is a range from pure black to pure white, and we can see that on the histogram. As you can see from these examples, no one pattern on your histogram will cover all photographs. Some will skew the histogram one way and some will skew the histogram the other way. It all comes down to personal taste, what you like and what you're looking for in your images. But the more you use your histogram, the more you'll understand it and the more you'll be able to use it to better your photography process. Another tool, which is very similar to the histogram, is the zebra function. If you shoot with a mirrorless camera and want to learn more about zebras, click on the eye in the corner. This will take you to another of my videos. And that's about it. The histogram is an aging tool and it's been in digital cameras for a really long time. But if you know how it works, you can use it to get really great exposures. As always, if you like what you see, give me a thumbs up. If you didn't, give me a thumbs down. And for weekly tutorials, hints and tips in photography and videography, subscribe and turn on notifications. I'll see you in the next one.